tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Good morning, everyone. Today is another lecture on fundamentals of Theravada. And during the last 2 weeks, we discussed how Theravadians, what is the relationship between the wrong view of a doer and the mind-born matter. Then we move on to, because we came into a position where we found that in principle or in based on logic, we call analyzing this under the light of nature. That's how in philosophy we call it. When we analyze it based on logic, we found out that it is not possible that either the Chetana to be a self or to be something other than the self while self is there. So we established the doctrine as it seems like there cannot be a self among the ultimate realities. Then when we establish that notion, we come into another big problem of causality. That means everything in the world is conditioned by some other thing, is based on causes. This has led to a huge debate in philosophy to understand whether we have free will or not. Especially given the laws of physics, it is very clear that beyond the atomic level, we can predict the things. The things are based on causes, and there will be the things would fall into the determinism would follow. The capacity to predict or not is something different. Practically, when you are in engineering or in mathematics, like practical application of maths, when you start to predict, there will always be a error, like there will always be some kind of inability to predict accurately. That is different. That is because of the inability of the human mind or due to the possibility of error occurring in a complex system. When the things are very complicated and things are getting more and more complex, we will not be able to predict things accurately very accurately. But in principle, when you bring forth all the physical laws into the action, as we believe these days, when all the physical laws are brought into combination, it is a known, established rule is that things fall into determinism. So prediction, whether the ability to predict or not, is a different thing. But in principle, in logic, based on logic, if you apply all the physical laws as we follow these days, it is impossible to get rid of determinism. Then when we move into the realm of the mentality, as we distinguish mind and matter very clearly in Buddhism, and we explain mind as a process, as mind is arising and passing away, and it would it would be followed by another mind, and so the lineage of mind continues, and all the minds are conditioned by the law of mind, chitta niyama, which we call. The obvious question that arises is, isn't the mind is also 100% under causality? If mind is under causality, what happens is we will be having a deterministic mind. So we will never be able to get out of the determinism if we are absolutely in the causality. But we see a possibility here. Now there is a way out regarding the mental events, but if we are talking about the physical events, applying the laws that we know and also using common sense, it would be very obvious, especially to one who knows the science, that you cannot get rid of determinism only in a physicalistic world, because when you apply the laws and matter, energy and matter into the context, and also bring the laws of the physics, things can be predicted by a super person or an intelligent being. Even the computers, the machines, may always have a difficulty in predicting 100% accurately. That's a different case. Predicting 100% accurately is a completely different matter than principles of the nature. Principles of the nature, you apply laws into it, and mind and matter and energy, combine it, then in principle things have to be determined. So there can be some kind of things such as called chaotic dynamics in the mind, like how could things could not be predicted, but still that is a error in prediction rather than a possibility in the actual world. Now, given this fact, now we came into the conclusion in the previous lectures, based on logic, that there cannot be a self. Either the Chetana cannot be a self, or Chetana is not connected to a self, or Chetana is not something other than the self while self is still existing. We ruled out the possibilities. Then what happens when the Theravadians ruled out this possibility? They fall into another trap. That is the trap of causality. Trap of causality leads to determinism, and it's very obvious that the Theravadians are not advocating a doctrine of determinism, and it's not randomness as well, because randomness is more chaotic than determinism. In the subatomic world, according to physical science, quantum physics, quantum dynamics, we see randomness according to the scientists, but above that we see the relative world that is governed by the laws of relativity, so things can be predicted. Practically can or not is a different case, but in principle things should be predictable. So it means things are determined. Now, so what happens is, if there is no self who can manipulate the causes, or who can take decisions against the causes, because if the causes are producing the effects, or causes are causing the effects, so there will always be a chain of cause and effects. So in the end, you will be able to predict what is going to happen in the far away future, only looking into the causes of the present moment. Because in the physical world, you can have only one outcome. That's the point here. You cannot have two outcomes. Now, if two things are striking at each other, taking all the possibilities of all the conditions around it, of the two things, and also conditions influencing it, we will be able to accurately predict what is going to happen next. If a bomb is being blasted, if the scientist knows all the conditions of the bomb, what kind of explosion is going to happen, and given all this other information about air pressure and so forth, temperature and so forth, he will be able to accurately predict the damage that can happen. If there is some kind of change in the calculations, either we attribute it to a miscalculation of the conditions or the prior conditions, or due to some kind of a technical error that is happening in the machine. Because in principle, we should be able to, because given all the conditions in the initial stage and the other conditions that are influencing it, surely the outcome is one. So in the physicalistic world, we have one outcome. We cannot have two possible outcomes. But in quantum dynamics, yes, there are lots of possible outcomes. Randomness is very obvious, and they say it's proven. I'm not an expert in it, but that's the accepted norm is it's proven fact. It's very accurately proven, means it's a known fact. So in the quantum world, things are not predictable. But in the level above the atoms, yes, things are predictable given all the factors. Now, what comes forth is the outcomes can be accepted, and there will be only one outcome. There is no possibilities. That's the point here. There is no possibilities when you come to causality. But what happens is, how should we deal with the mind in the mental element? Does it also have a one outcome given the causes? Whatever mental activity is happening, whatever mental experience that is happening, are we going to get a one outcome, or are there possibilities? This is a topic of debate. In modern philosophy, there's a special philosophical thought called anomalous monism, which talks about this holistic, like rational nature of mentality. So it could lead to various outcomes rather than a one outcome like in the physical world. Now, this is the point when we come into explore Chetana under this topic. This would be our main focus. That is our lecture today. It's not relevant to the Chittaja Rupas actually, but since we established the norm that Chetana cannot be a self, and Chetana is performing the actions together with the help of Chittaja Rupas. So Chittaja Rupas are behaving according to Chetana. So they are a very big contributor to the wrong view of a self or a self-doer. Then what happens is, when we exclude the possibilities of a self doing the actions, we come into another, it is inevitable that we come into another problem. That is the problem of causality. So we have to address this point, otherwise the lecture would not be a complete one. I am not going to go into all the details about this, but basically just to give an idea how could we handle this issue and go forward. So then I will move on to another topic next day. Now, we established the norm that Chetana cannot be the self with the theory of Leibniz theory. That is, like, if Chetana, if two things are identical, they should share all the characteristics that both has. Now, if A is equal to B, I am talking identical to them. If A is identical to B, that means all the types of A have the same entities of B. It means A and B are the same. So they should share in common all the attributes they have. If there is any attribute, any property actually, any property that A lacks which exists in B, or if there is any property that exists in A but lacks by B, then they cannot be identical. So what happens is, when we define the self, we have a very huge description of the self. Self is a person who thinks, who acts, who has emotions, and also a physical body. One may argue on this. Some may not agree that self has a physical body, but in our common sense, we know that when we define ourselves, we always possess a body which has a physical body. That's a normal common sense idea. Then we have emotions, we have physical bodies, and we have memory and so forth. These are the definition of I. Memory also plays a huge role here. But Chetana is just the mere intention to act, or force in acting. Yes, actions and intentions are also part of the self. Yes, there is a match here. This intention of Chetana can be found in the self. But self has more extra features, properties as well. It means these properties, emotions, physical body, and these things are lacking in Chetana. Chetana doesn't have them, right? So what happens is, self possesses some attributes, some properties that the Chetana does not have. It means Chetana and self cannot be the same. That is how we establish this theory, notion. Then, if Chetana is inseparably connected with the self, the problem what happens is, we see the Chetana, and also another feature is Chetana rises and falls, which is not an attribute of self. Self remains as a one entity throughout the whole period. It does undergo some change, but it doesn't go into a change as completely vanishing and arising newly. We don't experience such a thing in a self. We don't assume or we don't define self in that way. Therefore, this feature is found in Chetana, rising and falling feature, which is not found in a self. So therefore, we have to establish that they are not identical. This is obvious. This is a logically valid argument. Then what happens is, now we can bring that self and Chetana are not identical. They are two different things, but they are connected to each other inseparably connected as the Rupas in a one Kalapa. What happens is, because of this feature, we practically observe that Chetana rises and passes away, because Chetana differs according to the action. We have different types of Chetanas based on the action we are performing. Then if Chetana is rising and falling, and if self is connected to it inseparably, self should also rise and fall. And rising and falling of the self is something that cannot be accepted by the folks, because that is not a feature of the self. So self should not be having that feature. If it is connected with Chetana, it is inevitable that the self undergoes the destiny of the Chetana itself, because they are inseparable. Then what happens? These things do they are not, it doesn't match even. So self, Chetana cannot be together with self, because if they are together inseparably, even though they are two distinct things, what happens is self becomes something rising and falling, which is not a feature, which is against, violating or against one of the main features of the self. Then if self and Chetana are two different things and are staying in two different locations, or not, they are separable, they can exist without each other. It means self can remain without Chetana and Chetana can remain without self, or whatever it is. They are two distinct things. Then what happens is, Chetana is having the power of intention, and if Chetana is different from the self, this factor will be missing. The intention will be missing from the self, because the reason is Chetana is different from the self. They are not the same. It means self doesn't possess the features of Chetana, because the Chetana intention that we experience is attributed to Chetana, so it is not found in self. It is not that the self also has a Chetana and Chetana, a different Chetana is performing the action. No, that's not logically possible. Therefore, we have to exclude a very important feature of self. Then self becomes intentionless. It doesn't have an intention. What happens is, that is violating one of the main integral features of self. That is also one of the main features why a self is a self, because it should be experiencing the flavors, it should be recognizing the objects, it should have the intention to do things, it should know objects, and it should remain as a one entity. These are very vital features of the Chetana. These 5 features are very vital. Whether it possesses a physical body or not, that can be brought into debate, because some may believe, like for example, like Descartes, or some philosophers who lived in the Buddha's era, who believe that Rūpa is not part of the self, it is something apart from the self. Self is just associated in the Rūpa. Therefore, when we take Chetana and self are two distinct things, separable things, so they are not identical, what happens is self misses a very important feature in it. So that's the intention. Then that also contradicts with the common sense, common folks' understanding of belief. Even in the second approach, that they are inseparable, or they are connected with each other, still the same problem issue may come, because even in that explanation, self is lacking the intention. So we are not going to talk about that in detail, because we did this for two lectures. Now the problem is, it's very clear, and how does the actions take place? It's not done by a self. It is happening due to many causes, and Chetana is one of the pivotal causes in the performance of action. And we also know the physical body should be under certain good conditions, relevant conditions, supportive conditions, conducive conditions to the action. Otherwise, the Chetana alone cannot perform or execute a specific action. That also is evident in the case of person who is paralyzed, but still having the intention of doing something. He is unable to perform, bring his intention into reality, or execute his intentions, because his physical body is not giving the support that is necessary or needed. therefore, what we concluded, according to Theravada teachings, what we understand is Chetana, how we define is Chetana and other factors. Chetana produces Chittaja Rūpa and the support of Uttuja Rūpa and some other conditions. When they all come together, when they are acting in combination, in correlation, actions do take place. Actions do take place. When the relevant conditions are there, the trees propagate, sprouts come forth without a doer. When the conditions are there, things can happen. A very good example is the AI or an artificial intelligent machine. Without a self, we don't believe they have selves unless you are a panpsychist. A panpsychist would believe that everything in the world has a soul. Even that philosophy is followed by some Japanese. It's a very common there's a common belief in Japan. Not everyone is believing, but there's a prevailing idea that things, even inanimate things, have souls. So that's one of the reasons one of the Japanese scientists explained while I was listening to a video that they are experts in robotics. So they believe that everything, including the metals, have a self. And one of their features, one of his actually, at least one of his intentions was to prove this notion. So one day, so you can prove that robots have selves, or robots are conscious, or whatever it is. But there is a philosophical theory called panpsychism, believing that each and every element in the world has a consciousness, and some believe that there is elements of consciousness even in subatomic particles. So when they come together, they give a grand consciousness, they give rise to a grand consciousness. So according to some of the panpsychists, the entire universe has a grand consciousness when all the consciousnesses in it are combined, or they give rise to a much bigger consciousness. So unless you are a panpsychist or someone who holds to such a cultural view as prevailing in Japan, normally we don't believe the immaterial things are conscious. We don't think that immaterial conscious things are conscious, or immaterial things has a soul or a self. But still it performs, execute actions. It executes actions. When the relevant commands are given, the software is operating together with the hardware. When the stimuli are given, it does respond properly. So that is also one of the analogies that are used especially by the functionalists, to explain the human behavior of human life. So just leave it apart. But now the thing is, actions can happen without a self. That's the point we want to emphasize. Actions can happen without a self. It means when the relevant conditions are coming together, when they act in collaboration, yes, actions do take place. So that is what is happening according to Theravada teachings. Not going into depths, but when you look from the very outset, this is how it looks like. When the conditions are coming together, actions do take place. Actions do take place. Like for another example given in the books, when the relevant conditions such as the air, sunlight, so forth are there, the trees do propagate without any doer or one who manipulates these activities like a god. So things do happen. Things do happen without a self, and we can have a very clear explanation, very clear evidence in today's artificial intelligence that the machines are capable of performing actions without a self. So what is the requirement? If the relevant conditions are there, yes, actions do take place. Actions do happen. So what we need are the relevant conditions. The problem here is, now this is the problem. If the relevant conditions are coming into play, under the rule of causality, according to the rule of causality, as we know with regard to the physical laws, there can only be a one outcome. That is also known fact. That's why we establish laws. A law means there has to, if this happens, this would be the outcome. There cannot be two possible outcomes. Nothing to say about probability. There cannot be two possible outcomes. There cannot be two possible outcomes when you merge all the matter and the energy in together with the physical laws. Physical laws, yes, some say they are just descriptive. Anyway, so when these things are combined together, you can have only one outcome, and we can predict it. We can predict it. In principle, we will be able to predict, but whether we can predict it accurately or not, that's a different case. That's a different thing. The same thing happens with the brain. According to the physicalistic view, there are some called chaotic dynamics, like we will not be able to predict what would be the outcome of a brain process. And that is an inability to predict, because the machines and ourselves are unable to predict things as they are. There is always a possibility of an error. But in principle, what they do is they attribute from the beginning of the originating of the cells. Now, for example, two neurons, okay, C and another C in two different persons, Mr. A and Mr. B is having C fiber, CF and CF. So, they are identical in terms of types, not in terms of tokens. They are two different neurons, but they are similar. So, when a certain stimuli is given, for example, if a certain stimuli is given to C, a similar stimuli is given to CF and CF of A and B, we would expect this to outcome of a, for example, D fiber firing. This would lead to a D fiber firing. But in person B, we experience, instead of a D fiber firing, sometimes we may experience a E fiber firing. So this is possible. This is also found in brain neuroscience. So what they do is, what they say is, when the same conditions are there and same inputs are given, we have a different output. What is the reason for this? Because given the physical laws of physics, this is not a mechanical error, because this is a biological thing. So what would be the outcome? Why it is happening like two outcomes are there? So what their suggestion is, these two neurons in their origination, though they look same, had different types of different conditions or DNA, whatever it is. There were slight small differences during their origination. This had this kind of a difference in the beginning, while it had this of B, CF had a different condition. So due to the difference of the initial conditions, though they look same, though they are identical, while the stimuli is given, due to the changes of the initial stages, we have a different outcome. So still they attribute it, because this is the condition, this is the causes. So causes are different, so the outcome is different. If the causes are similar, this is the point here, if the causes are identically similar, there is no difference in it. If two things are happening at two different places with 100% identical causes, the outcome should be the same. That is the law of causality. I'll repeat again, if the causes are 100% same, if there is not the slightest difference, as in this case, even during their origin, if there was no difference, if they are identical, in principle, if the same stimuli is given, if the same conditions are provided, the outcome has to be same. So that's the rule of causality. So in causality, you cannot have two outcomes. You have only one possibility. Predictability and unpredictability are two different things. In principle, you can have only one outcome according to causality. So what happens is, now this is the law of causality. Now if causes are conditioning the action, and if there is no self who can manipulate, who can go against the causes and take a different decision, what happens is, when the relevant conditions are given, you get an outcome, and that outcome is already predetermined. Because as in this case, if the conditions are, if you can calculate all the status of the condition, you will be able to predict, not in practicality, but in logic, in principle, it is possible to predict what will be the outcome. In the same way,
when given all the factors of the mental aspect and the physical aspects, the action is predictable. So we fall into the trap of determinism when we avoid the self. When we avoid the self and goes into causality, it is inevitable that we fall into the trap of determinism. That's the point here. Because if everything are determined by the causes, actions, the outcomes are predictable. So how do we solve this issue? So before we go on to that, we'll talk about this argument. How we need to first establish this argument and understand it. So I'll read with from the previous apart from the previous lecture for 2.449, and then we can go into talk on how to solve this issue. According to Theravada, not only that Chetana cannot function independently, but it also cannot arise on its own. It's nothing to say about Chetana incapable of performing actions by itself. It even cannot arise by itself. Chetana is a mental factor. It is the foremost power in cognizing objects and performing verbal, physical and mental activities. Act of cognition and physical, verbal and mental acts happen only when there is Chetana. It arises together with the Chitta. If the consciousness does not focus on an object, having delimiting it from the other objects, Chetana will never be able to arise as the force of that particular cognition. In the same way, if the consciousness does not focus on a specific action, Chetana will not be able to function as the driving force of that particular action. So it means Chetana needs the support of consciousness. That is what is meant here. Therefore, it is not possible for the volition to arise apart from a consciousness. According to Theravada Abhidhamma, Chetana needs the support of other co-arising mental factors, including the consciousness, for its arising. Also, apart from its consciousness, you also need the support of other mental factors as well. Therefore, it is not that Chetana arises on its own and perform actions. Chetana arises owing to various causes, and due to presence of Chetana, actions occur. So Chetana arises with the help of others, and due to the presence of Chetana, actions do take place. When doing various actions, new intentions occur based on the intended action. So when you are going to do various activities, based on the nature of the activity, Chetanas arise. This is also a good reason to consider that Chetana is not a self, not the self. Because if Chetana is identical with the self, this would amount for new selves arising when performing each action. Okay, we talked about this. Moreover, the nature of Chetana, which performs acts, vary on various conditions. It varies on various conditions. For instance, now think about this scenario. Two gangsters have come to shoot two different men on two different occasions. They have come to shoot two different men on two different occasions. Out of the two victims, first is a man who has faith in the phenomenon of karma and vipaka, and a devout Buddhist. Now he is a devout Buddhist and believes in karma vipaka and believes in a rebirth. The other does not believe in rebirth. He is either atheist or either it could be an agnostic who is not clear about the rebirth. Agnostics, or he is a person who doesn't believe in God and doesn't believe in such phenomena such as rebirth and so forth. If we analyze the way these two victims would react to the firing, we may list the following possibilities. The first victim, he is a Buddhist who believes in rebirth. These are just probabilities, they're just assumptions. They are not accurate, like just to understand the condition nature of the action. There can be numerous possibilities. You cannot limit the possibilities of it because we are coming into the mental arena. We talk about that later. Attacking the gangster. He may attack the gangster, flee from the place, face the death crying and screaming, face the death silently with an undistracted mind. He can even do that. Second person also could do all the things. Attacking the gangster, flee from the place, face to death, crying and screaming, face the death silently with an undistracted mind. But the devout Buddhist could perform another action, which will not be performed by the number two person. What is that? Paying respect to the Buddha, hoping for a good rebirth. He could pay respect to the Buddha, hoping for a good rebirth. The other person is very unlikely to do that because he doesn't have faith in Buddha, and unless some kind of a strange phenomena take place, it seems impossible, mostly impossible, that he would pay respect to the Buddha, expecting a rebirth, unless some dramatic change goes in his mind just before the shooting. Possibilities are there, but it's very unlikely. So what does it mean? Now, Person A may perform 5 actions, while person B may perform only 4 actions. Why this difference in numbers? Because of the prior conditions. A had faith in Buddhism and also believed in karma vipaka, so is expecting another life after death. But B is not expecting another life, so is not preparing himself for another good rebirth. So very obvious. So conditions are the things. The conditions are conditioning or moduling the nature of our actions. Out of the list of possible reactions, the second victim is never expected. I would say very highly not expected. Seems not expected, very unlikely to do the fifth one owing to his view about the life. One who does not believe in rebirth sees no point in paying respect to the Buddha just before death. However, the first victim may attend to this possibility owing to his belief. This generally speaking, just want to show that our actions are shaped by the conditions in ourselves or that we are associating. Therefore, it is clear that the nature of volitions for various actions differ depending on many factors. Therefore, Chetana does not arise in its own. Another point. Now, this Chetana, it may have various types. Chetana may arise as to run, to silently face the death, to scream, to attack, or to pay respect to the Buddha. So, various possibilities are, various types of Chetanas may arise based on the conditions. But if some conditions are missing, some Chetanas are improbable, like is not very likely to happen. So, the nature of Chetana is governed, is mostly affected by the conditions that we associate or the conditions that are within us. That's the point here. That are within us and there are things. So, now if the nature of Chetana is determined by other various factors, this is the point. Other various factors, based on various factors, the nature of Chetana is decided. These factors gives the outcome what type of a Chetana is going to arise. If the nature of Chetana is determined by other factors, the following problem arises. If the nature of Chetana is solely decided based on past and present causes, it has to be concluded that all activities are conditioned. All activities are conditioned. We accept this norm. That's not an issue. All activities are conditioned because no reality arises without the conditions. This leads to the doctrine of determinism as by thoroughly examining all the relevant causes, one would be able to predict all the intention and their natures even before they arise. Even if you analyze all the possible conditions, like one who has thinking, analyzing capacity like the Buddha, would surely be able to predict what type of a Chetana is coming. So, he will be able to rule out all the other Chetanas and say only this is possible because given the conditions. It may seem to us that there are 5 possibilities. It may seem to us that there are 5 possibilities. In principle, seems like, but when you analyze it thoroughly, there can be only outcome, like in the physical causality. This is a very important factor. I hope you understand this point because in physical causality, even though we may see that there are possibilities, like for example, in a lottery, when the tokens or balls are mixed and one thing comes out, so obviously if the machine was put on to a certain period and it is not manually switched in and on and off, from the moment it was put into the basket or into the whatever the thing that holds the balls, given all the physical laws, the outcome was already determined. There cannot be a random outcome. That is the nature of physics. Because if a dice is put onto the sky, like turned, put up and like rolled, a coin is tossed. So given all the conditions, a person or a super intelligent being or a super computer without any errors would be able to predict exactly what is going to be the outcome. So in principle, logically, it is a valid argument. So what happens is, if that same theory is applied to mentalities, given all the conditions, you will be able to predict what would be the outcome. And this is determinism. This is different. This is a topic that is discussed in modern philosophy, Western philosophy very thoroughly. If causality is true, you cannot avoid determinism. That's a known fact. It's very difficult to argue against that. You may feel like it's possible to see and see. No, it's not possible. You'll be always stuck, because a thorough analysis of the causes would always say there is no two possibilities. There's only one outcome. If we are taking causality as explained in physical science, that's the point here. If physical laws are applicable, if matter and mind and matter is applied, under the physical laws, energy and matter is applied, not mind and matter, sorry, energy and matter, and the physical laws is applied, governing, then there can be only one outcome. Now, how do we get out of this problem? How do we get out of it? So it is what some philosophers have pointed out. It's a very important thing for us to understand, to figure out in Buddhism as well. Some have said mind, the outcomes of mind, mental causation, which we call mental causation, the outcomes of mentality, physical outcomes we can easily predict, and because they are governed by certain laws. But the mental outcomes are not predictable, and they are not governed by laws of nature. They are governed by laws of rationality, the rational nature. What does it mean? What does it mean? Mentalities do not act like physical entities. Physical entities, if the billiard ball A is shot at the billiard ball B, based on the striking, we are capable of determining its projection, where it is heading, given all the factors. Because given the mass of the two balls, the momentum, so forth, and all the conditions, we'll be able to accurately say what is going to happen. But when we take mentalities, think about this scenario. Now, a person has a belief that there is a tiger in the woods. What would be the outcome? Can we predict the real outcome of this cause? This is a cause now. Now what would be the outcome? What would be the result of this? Is it compulsory that the person is running, or is it compulsory that he would take a bold decision to fight against the tiger, or would he lie down and pretend to be dead, or would he climb a tree, or would he just remain silent and let anything to happen unexpectedly as we don't expect? Okay, he's not worried about the tiger, he's worried about his own effects. Everything seems to be possible. Now the problem is, if mind is a physical entity, if mind is an entirely physical entity or a brain state, then we have to go to the physical laws and say there can be only one outcome, because physicality, you don't have two outcomes above the quantum level. Above the quantum level. That's also a huge problem the physicalists are facing. But another way to look into this, mental aspect. Mentality is either a substance, a different substance from physicality, or mentality is a property of physicality, a different property. On both the ways, it is different from physical properties. The mind either is a mental property, different from a physical property, or the mind is a different substance from the physical thing. The difference between substance and properties are, property are two different distinct things that can exist in their own. They may depend on each other, that's a different, irrelevant case, but they have their own existence. They have their own existence. In Buddhism, mind is a different property than the physical. Even though they depend upon each other, in the Arupa realm, mind can exist without the body, and body can exist without a mind, and it's obvious in the inanimate world and also in the Asanya Satta and in Nirodha Samapatti we see a body without the consciousness. So therefore, they are two different substances even though they need to depend upon each other in different worlds according to Theravada teachings. Property means they are the two properties of the same thing. They are the two properties of the same thing. So in that regard you have to take, there is one physical substance or a thing. That thing has some physical properties while it has some mental properties as well. These mental properties and physical properties are distinct properties of the same thing. So that is called, we call mentality as a property. But still is different. Taking physical thing as the mental is called, it's a monism, it's taking the identity theory. We say the physical thing itself is the mental. The brain state, the firing of the brain state itself is the mind or the pain, whatever it is, whatever mental state it is. So these are three different movements. Taking mentality, something other than the physical, taking mental states as properties of the physical or the same thing. The physical properties and mental properties are distinct properties of the same thing, or taking mental properties are identical to physical properties. Mental properties are identical to physical properties. So it means the physical properties of the brain firing, fiber firing and so forth is the mental states. So if we identify them, mental states are physical states, and given the fact that physical states are governed by laws, it is inevitable that mental states would also have one outcome. And this rational holism, we call this rational holism, which I am going to talk today, this point, is not possible because there can only be one outcome. But in the mental arena, we see which we call a rational holism. It means it can have various outcomes. Believing there is a tiger, now we are taking mentality or mental states as different substances or different properties from the physical properties. It's a different substance from the physical substance, or it is a different property from the physical property. So in that case, mentality has its own causality, has its different way of acting from the mind. So if we bring this argument into the action, yes, we can avoid determinism. It can have some kind of a different process. So in the mental arena, we may have various outcomes. In the physical arena, yes, it's just one outcome. But in the mental arena, given one cause, it is possible to have various outcomes. Believing that there's a tiger in the woods, one may think intention to run, or one may have the intention to fight, one may have the intention to stay still, or one may have the intention to play dead, act as dead. He would play dead. All possibilities are there. And how is it determined? Which outcome? How do we determine this? Is it completely governed by all the causes of the mentality? Is it the case? Now imagine this scenario. I am going to bring another argument on this. Think about the bad deeds the people have done or the foolish decisions that we have taken in our lives. I hope everyone has done such things, taken from the childhood. Yes, we all have things that it would have been better if I done it differently. That thought is there in almost all the humans. Even I would say Bodhisattva would recall in his last life, he spent 6 years practicing irrelevant path, right? So he may not have regretted about it, but he could have said that we do take bad decisions, yes. So now think about such activities. Now action A in someone's life. For example, we say his Tissa, Mr. Tissa, he Action A, he did a bad thing of killing an animal, and action B was another killing. Action C was a stealing. Action C was a bad decision of investing, bad investment. For example, okay, we have 4 actions. Now, if we analyze them, sometimes there can be a possibility where we would have said, given all the conditions, that this killing of that particular being, I would say he's not killing a human, okay, we would say he killed some animals. Now, this killing was inevitable. He could not have stopped it given the condition, because he was immature, he had not developed the capacity of rational thinking by then, he was too small, and something happened, the cat broke his toy and he couldn't think very deeply, and he initially killed the cat. And we would also forgive him because he didn't have the capacity to think other way. He was very emotional, he was in a different mind state, and things came out. It was inevitable, we could say. Sometimes we say those actions would have happened, that we were never able to stop it. But some actions we know, in our minds we know that some actions could have been prevented. Some actions could have been prevented. Could have. Prevented. What does it mean? If that action could have been prevented, because these actions took place given some conditions. Everything happens due to a condition. There is no argument in that. Conditions do play a huge, causes do play a huge role. If these actions were preventable, that means at least we had 2 possibilities: doing the action, not performing the action. Doing the action or not performing it. Maybe there were other possibilities as well. It opens the gate, obviously. Just forget about them. At least we have 2 possibilities, which is against the physical laws. Which against the physical laws. Because according to physical laws, there can be only one outcome. So it shows that the mental arena, if we believe some actions could have been prevented, and that's the legal framework as well. That's why we punish others, because you should have the control over yourself. You shouldn't have done that. You should have thought and done otherwise. But if the basis of this legal frame is accepted, which governs our thoughts of our civilization and the norms of our civilization, that we are capable of restraining ourselves without doing the evil deeds, at least there are possibilities we could restrain ourselves. On such occasions, even, for example, someone put a gun onto my head and say, do this. Am I forced to do that? No, I still have a will. I could accept the bullet and not do that. Still, the possibility is there. So, if this norm is accepted as a truth, it means there can be few outcomes in the mental arena. This is called rational holism. One mental state can lead to various mental states, unlike physical properties or states. Physical properties can lead to one outcome only, given the conditions. Activation of a physical property can give rise to a very specific, unique physical property activation. But activation of a mental property can give rise to various mental properties. That's the way, one of the ways out here. And so this we practically experience in neuroscience, chaotic dynamics, that neurons are behaving in different ways that we predict. So what the scientists have done, as I have read, that they attribute this difference to the origin of these neurons. There was a slight difference in the origin, so when under the same conditions, though they are identical from the very outer look. But when they are put into the same conditions, they behave differently. So it means still there is only one outcome, because if you calculate if you understand the neuron together with its origin, principally there is only one outcome. So in principle it's not a chaotic dynamic. It's become chaotic because we are unable to predict it. We are unable to know all the facts about the neuron. Maybe the origin of those neurons had a prior reason, mother's neurons, mother's DNA, father's, until it may goes according to physical science till the Big Bang. But still in the end there is only one outcome in the end. That's how they explain this chaotic dynamics, as I have read. But according to mental, if you accept there is a mental property or a mental substance different from the physical, it could be that its causality is quite different from the physical properties. Davidson, a Western philosopher, suggested that psychophysical, he is not talking about mental to mental even, psychophysical, you can include mental to mental, psycho to psycho, psychophysical causation or happenings doesn't have laws. Why is that? Because of this. You cannot predict it. There is no specific law. Seeing that there is, believing that there is a tiger nearby, you cannot predict the same one outcome, like in a physical attraction. You cannot predict. It could be anything. It could be anything. If I simply say this, now think, someone believes there is rain. This can be known through various ways. You can got to know about rain, seeing umbrellas are open, seeing the water is drizzling, or by seeing your cat who doesn't like water has come and is sleeping inside, is not willing to go outside, so you can predict that there is rain. There can be even weird predictions as well. Someone can even believe that zebras are not wearing their raincoats because it's raining. Because if he had formulated such a story, had not seen the zebras before and read a story that zebras too take out their coats when it's raining, so he sees the zebras without coats, raincoats, so because they are not wearing raincoats in the reality. So one may believe that it's raining because zebras are not wearing it. So with any perception, you can have any belief. With any belief, you can have any activity. So that's called rational holism. Anything is possible in the mental arena. Anything is possible in the mental arena. But if you reduce the mentality into physicality or physical elements, then you have only one outcome. No doubt about that. Now we are talking mentality is different. So there are many outcomes. So one mental activity, as we said, given the conditions, is possible to have various outcomes. All are possible. All are possible. So then we are going out of determinism. The possibility was brought in. Then what happens? Is this possibility? Now, chaotic dynamics, scientists would say it's attributed to the origin of the neurons, but we could easily say that's the influence of the consciousness. Consciousness is influencing the brain states, which will be a very tough thing to explain. Just leave it apart. Maybe it can be similar to quantum entanglement. Okay, these are just hypotheses. But mental states are affecting the neural states. Since mental causation is different, there's the rational holism that many things are possible. So even neurons under this influence may act weirdly against our predictions. While C firing was expected to do D firing, it went into E firing because the two minds, the consciousness of the two beings acted differently. Now another pressing question is arising. If this rational holism is accepted in the mental arena, how this path is chosen, how a specific path is chosen. Is it the highest probability? If highest probability, there will be one outcome. Still we go into determinism, because you choose the probability and the highest probability would happen is outcome. Or it's just probability that this can happen. 50% this action may take place. So for example, the tiger's case, there's a 50% to run, 25% to fight, 5% to stay still, and the remaining 20% to play dead. And is it just probability and anything could happen? What does it mean? We go to randomness. It's also very chaotic. If randomness is there, then no control at all. No control at all. Then we have to bring a controlling element. If we want to have a regulation of our actions, it is impossible to do that without the controlling element. This controlling agent is called causal agent. Causal agent decides which path to take. Causal agent decides which path to take. Now, isn't it that we are coming back to self? Because if causal agent CA, Chetana had the CA element, causal agent to decide which path to go, isn't it that we are bringing the self into Chetana? We avoided Chetana and came into causality. In order to avoid the causality, because causality leads to determinism, and avoid the causality, we brought the causes. Avoid determinism, we talked about causes, and we move into mental causation to avoid physical determinism, and we have probability, then possibility and probability, and in order to, then it can open the gate to randomness. In order to avoid randomness, you have to bring causal agent. Causal agent isn't it self, one who decides and do the actions? So we seems like we are in a vicious cycle. Causal agent. Another accepted norm in philosophy. We want to avoid determinism and also not to fall into randomness, and also to know that there is some kind of free will in us. We can make decisions. We may do or we may not do certain actions. There has to be a very important agent, that is the causal agent, who decides on what to do. Who decides on what to do. Now the problem comes. Isn't it the self that we were initially denying? Now we go back to self. It's a very delicate topic. I'm not going to talk in detail about it. This is just touching the topic. We can go deeper and deeper and dig into this. We'll not be able to come out with the greatest solution, but we can still get enlightenment on this and keep on thinking and keep on understanding about this. That will be very helpful to our vipassana as well. But that's not my purpose here. I just want to touch upon this and move into another topic, another lesson next day. So now causal agent has the decision making. This is the main feature of causal agent, decision making. Does the self have decision making? Yes, obviously. Decision making. That's why it's self. Self makes decision. So if you bring the causal agent, that means chetana other than the intention, or you forget about the chetana or the mental aspects, whatever it is, chetana or mentality if we expand the thing, or maybe the chetana itself or chitta, whatever, the causal agent, okay, just forget about chetana, we can bring another mentality, a causal agent is introduced. Now isn't the causal agent equal to the self? Yes, one aspect, yes, because in chetana also, intention was found in the self as well, right? So there was some kind of a similarity. But why did we deny the fact that self is the Chetana, because Chetana does lack other features of the self. Other features of the self. In the same way, if we attribute this causal agency to the consciousness or whatever mental factor, we are not going to talk in detail, just imagine there's a causal agency in our mind stream, or every consciousness has this capacity, every Javana consciousness, whatever it is, who is capable of deciding things, isn't it equalizing or isn't it advocating a self in the consciousness? Yes, consciousness, self has deciding factor, but is it the only, is it defining the self entirely? Is the self only the causal agent? Just because something is a causal agent, is it the self? Is it the self that the Buddha denied? No, self has many features. Self has emotions, self has thinking, self does recognize, self does act, self make decisions. And sometimes self has a body, we forget about it. So self has, and also it remains as a one thing for a longer period. The identity remains. So even this causal agent, a decision is taken, but still it vanishes. It's not going to remain as it is. So rising and falling is not denied. This practically can be experienced. So therefore, just because the causal agency is introduced into the consciousness, that doesn't mean that we are advocating the consciousness as the self. So as intention is found in every mentality, in Chetana, in the mind stream, intention is found, in the same way causal agency is also found. But just introducing the causal agency doesn't mean that we introduce self into the consciousness, because self has some unique features, at least some very unique features. So those unique features, there is quite a bit of a list, and those things lists are not identical to this causal agency. Just because causal agency is there, it doesn't mean the consciousness, every consciousness or the collective of consciousnesses become a self. No. That's not the case. So therefore, when we bring the causal agency, the mind, forget about Chetana, take like it can be another mind with that capacity prior to Chetana, because we decide and then we have the intention of acting. So this causal agent decided which action to take place. In most of the cases, it would decide on the highest probable action. That's the case. But there is a moment on some occasions which it can reflect on the possibility, on the benefits, disadvantages, consequences of his action, evaluate them, and then decide upon the best. Then one can bring, are they also conditioned by causes? The argument will remain. It will go on, I know that. How could it evaluate? It should have also causes. And why did it evaluate and decided this? Isn't there a cause for that? The causality can still sneak into this and cause the problem. But I'm not going to talk about that in detail, because this question is very difficult to be solved. But what the point is, the consciousness has the causal agency. Then only you can get out of randomness and determinism and introduce free will into this. So when the causal agency is there, consciousness does make the decision, take the decision and decide on what to do. And this still is not advocating the doctrine of self, right? So in order to answer this problem, we must attend to the example we looked at. In that, first victim had a possibility in him to perform all 5 actions. The person, devoted Buddhist, remember? The devoted Buddhist had 5 possibilities and the other person had 4 possibilities. And there's a tendency to perform certain actions among the 5 over others, depending on the state his mind was in. Depending on the state of the mind, even though 5 were possible, he had a tendency to perform specific acts more. These things can be predicted prior to the action. However, just before one of the 5 actions are executed, the person takes the decision with many mind processes. Sometimes, having considered various reasons, the victim may even decide to do the action which had the least possibility. That's the point here, which had the least possibility. If it is regarding a specific action, he may also take the decision to not to do the action. That possibility has to be there. So that's why we in common sense, we believe some actions could have been prevented, or I could have not done them. So that regret is there because there was a possibility. There was a possibility. If this is the case, do this notion establish the doctrine of self as the person took his decision having thought? Not necessarily, because the decision was taken from mentalities that are momentary, they are rising and falling, which arise and vanish quickly. Moreover, many causes have already influenced the decision from the first place. Those mentalities which took the decision also arose due to many other reasons. Many other reasons played for their arising, and also the pool of decisions were already determined, like decided prior from the causes, but the thing is deciding within the pool. That's the point here. Those mentalities which took the decision also arose due to many other reasons. They also could not arise on their own. And those mentalities are also realities that possess unique intrinsic natures. Therefore, the decision was taken not by someone whom we can call a person or a being. No, not at all. If it was taken by mentalities that arise and vanish due to causes. However, this is the highlighting point. However, those mentalities have the capacity to take a decision that had the least probability. That's the point. It has the capacity to take a decision and even to execute the action that had the least possible probability. So that's the point here. So that's the way to avoid self-doctrine. There can have a lot of arguments from the philosophical point of view. One can keep on arguing and still say the causality is still involved. But I want to emphasize on this. If you bring 100% causality, I'm not denying that the realities are arising without cause. Every reality is caused, but I'm talking about the decisions taken by these mentalities. If decisions are completely taken under the influence of causal laws, it's just conditioned by all the conditions, then you cannot avoid determinism or randomness either way. But if the causality is there, it falls into determinism. If you bring the rational holism of mental causation and says mental caution is slightly different, you may have various outcomes, still you fall into randomness. Then in order to avoid randomness, to avoid determinism, you have to have the causal agency which decides on that, on things. But causal agencies are acting under the influence causality because it cannot go beyond the range. Now, some decisions are given to it based on the causes and conditions that were acting. There can be weird changes in that, even it's getting very, very less probable. So it has to decide within that scope. But its capacity to decide should be there, otherwise we fall into determinism or randomness. So that's the point here. So it was a very interesting topic. I tried my best to deliver it. I don't know whether it was successful. So anyway, that's the topic that we are going to end this discussion about the Karaka Ditti and the Chitta Rupas, and we'll move on to the next topic, the final topic of Chitta Rupas, Rupas related to Chitta, and then move on to a new lesson called Utuja Rupa. I conclude the lecture giving the opportunity to the forum.
After listening to you today, all what I can say is Lord Buddha and the Dhamma is unexplainable in words, because the understanding of this, how the mentality works and how the mentality works without identification of a self is possible in itself is such a great theory. And what you try to do today was from current scientific understanding, trying to see whether it can be matched. And you brought very logical, very scientific arguments. In fact, what came to my mind was, now actually the engineering is based on physics. But when physics is physics is more theoretical with so many assumptions. And then when we try to My training was as a mechanical engineer, so we try to use those dynamics and various other theories of physics and create certain things which will work in practical world. Engines or machines or whatever is doing exactly that. Of course, now with electronics and AI being added to it, it can be even more complicated. But there again, though we say causality and determinism may decide the science, but engineering is not truly based on it. Because what we do is we always add safety factors. There is that probability aspect you are trying to bring in is covered with safety factors when we are designing machines or when we are designing various other processes. So therefore, what worked in my mind was that whatever the scientific findings we have today does not explain completely what is happening in the world. It has limitations and it has weaknesses. So it will be probably impossible to start from that and go back to Buddhism and try to explain what is stated in Tripitaka, what you teach us as Theravada principles of Buddhism may not be totally possible, right? And the last point is, actually, you are talking about the control aspect. So, though you did not mention, Chetana is not the only mental factor, but there are other mental factors which combines and forms yoniso or ioniso manasikara, and then even vitarka. Those mental factors also affect how a particular situation is faced by a particular individual and how he reacts.
Yeah, even though because we have very defined all the mentalities in their intrinsic nature, this causal agency is something you cannot attribute into one of the chetasikas. But we have to say that capacity of causal agency has to be there, because even though things may change, how we react to the things can be different based on the mentalities that we have, but the openness to a probabilistic openness has to be there, and we should be able to take a decision. So this causal agency is, rather than saying that it is a specific this and this mental factor, or it is some kind of inherited capacity of the consciousness or the mental cluster. Like it is a action that the entire thing can do. That's what I meant, because we are unable to specifically point out what mentality has this causal agency. Because when you are taking a yoniso manasikara or a decision to act and so forth, it is done by a cluster of mentalities. But the point is, without causal agency, we will never be able to get out of determinism or randomness, as the logic suggests. And that's what Buddha also said in Attakari Sutta, that if someone says that there is no effort, that you are not putting effort, that he said that he even doesn't want to see such a person, because if everything is happening due to causes, if everything is forced by a prior cause or a prior and present causes, and we are it's just happening due to causes, then there cannot be any way of changing the future. So in only way to change the future is there has to be a thing that take decisions against the causal flow. Only then that's possible, because even how much you bring into the activity, when you combine all the possibilities, there can be only one outcome. There can be only one outcome. So in logic, that's the way it is, because otherwise we go to randomness. Because if we talk about probabilistic things, this and this may happen. because it may happen, like it may go into the high probability way or the low probabilistic path. So it's randomness. It can happen at it, like you cannot predict it. You can just, what they say is like in quantum science, the probability, that's all. But other way is you can have one outcome. So in order to avoid determinism and randomness, we have to have some kind of agency which has the control. If that agency is not brought into the topic, in my opinion, the 𝐓𝐴𝐷 Sutta was based on that agency. 𝐓𝐴𝐷 Sutta, though it is not specifically mentioned as I put in the words that I put out. So if without that agency, either we have randomness or determinism, and this is a logical fact. It's not something we call can be empirically proven or not. This is just pure logic. You have only two options: randomness or determinism. There cannot be something in between. And if we are going to avoid both, and only thing is we are able to manipulate the things, and manipulation is done by decision making, and that can only be done with the agency of in philosophy we call it causal agency. So that's why it has to be introduced, and my opinion is Buddha accepts this notion, because that's why he would say you could not have done that, you could have prevented yourself, and that's the basis of Buddhism, because we are able to, the objects are appealing to defilements and we are able to restrain, and we are able to take a decision and not to react to those objects and not to yield ourselves to those objects. So without that causal agency, things doesn't make sense actually. There would be no actual purpose in the world as well, because things are happening due to causes, that's all. Decision making. So yeah, regarding your first opinion, I'm not like it's not an approach to justify Buddhism based on physical laws or anything, but either we have two things. That's not something the science can think or find. We have either determinism or we have randomness. So these are the only two options that we have. So far to the findings, in the physical world, things are under causality, so they are determined. In the quantum level, it's random. We don't see any 100% random things in the world above the atomic world, even though in engineering or whatever science they are keeping some kind of safety or inability to predict. In logic, because you cannot disprove logic. Logic is either you have two options, randomness or determinism. There is something called compatibilism, that is still, it's called, you are still accepting determinism and accepting free will. That's a different thing. But you cannot go out of determinism and randomness. These are two extremes that there is no other way. Only other way to avoid these two streams, like Majjhima Patipada to avoid the self, the only other way to avoid this, Majjhima Patipada is quite different. I just took the example of two extremes and the middle path. So only way to avoid this is bringing the causal agency into the topic. We bring the causal agency, the mind is able to influence my body, and my body is able to influence the outer bodies, and then finally the entire world as well. So even if we are going to get rid of, take our path away from global warming, only thing, if you have if it is not destined, only way to avoid that is bringing the causal agent into action, and then we can change the destiny of our world as well. So therefore, now for the time being, science is talking about a deterministic world. In the quantum level, it's a random world, random realm, and you cannot have the third option. Only these two are possible. So even a new scientific find comes out, it will be either, only possibility is if it differs from the current findings, it has to be a random outcome. They may find a exact random outcome in far away in the universe or inside the world that cannot be predicted by physical laws. It seems like improbable in my opinion. But anyway, that can be a problem. So one can find out a scientific theory saying that randomness is true even in the outer world above the atomic world. But still we have two options, randomness and determinism. So because when we go into the mental arena, as we explain in 𝐈𝐈𝐓 𝐅𝐮𝐧𝐝𝐚𝐸𝐴, just forget about Western philosophy. 𝐈𝐈𝐓 𝐅𝐮𝐧𝐝𝐚𝐸𝐴 says the same saddha can lead to faith, same saddha can lead to another wisdom, same saddha can lead to effort, and also that same saddha can lead to unwholesomeness. Kusala can support kusala, kusala can support akusala, kusala can support abhyakata. Forget about the abhyakata, because in the javana level you can have a kusala, by doing a kusala, an outcome could be another kusala or it can be a different akusala. So we see the rational holism here. It's not governed by laws. For example, if you bring now chitta producing chittaja Rūpa is a law, because nature of the chitta would solely decide the nature of the chittaja Rūpas. It's impossible that given all the factors, the nature of the chittaja Rūpas can be predicted from the beginning. It's possible. But can we predict, I have done a wholesome deed, this wholesome deed, reflecting on this, would I get wholesome mind or unwholesome mind? If this can be predicted, then we are in a big problem. Then we are stuck in the deterministic world. So it seems like, according to Buddhist teachings, he is talking about rational holism. Buddha has taught about rational holism. Like, things are possible. With kusala, kusala is possible, akusala is possible. Even abhyakata is possible. By a specific act, specific belief, all things are possible. So likewise, in the mental arena, the probability, possibility and the probabilities come into play, which is not found in the physical world. So either in the mental arena, one can still argue and talk against me and say, based on Abhidhamma, and say, no, there cannot be two possibilities or probabilities, we can have one outcome. Then that person is talking about determinism. There's no argument in that. He may not be able to understand what determinism is, but if you say that there's only one outcome of a one cause, that's determinism, that's pure determinism. Only way is 2-3 possible outcomes. So that is being explained in Buddhist teachings. So as my opinion, rational holism is accepted, and it's something that can be known by ourselves as well. But then what happens, if this is the case, still we are going in, still we may bordering the randomness, because it could be wholesome, it could be unwholesome. So who comes into play? As you said, Yoniso Manasikara comes into play here. So Yoniso Manasikara, the deciding factor, whether to do this or that, evaluating the factors, the Yoniso Manasikara comes into play. If Yoniso Manasikara doesn't have the causal agency which I explained, is Yoniso Manasikara entirely governed by the prior causes? So it's already decided because of the causes that I may have Yoniso Manasikara or I may not have Yoniso Manasikara? Then it doesn't make sense, then it's still determinism. So Yoniso Manasikara, after Yoniso Manasikara, the outcome seems like improbable in my opinion. But anyway, that can be a problem. So one can find out a scientific theory saying that randomness is true even in the outer world above the atomic world. But still we have two options, randomness and determinism. So because when we go into the mental arena, as we explain in 𝐈𝐈𝐓 𝐅𝐮𝐧𝐝𝐚𝐸𝐴, just forget about Western philosophy. 𝐈𝐈𝐓 𝐅𝐮𝐧𝐝𝐚𝐸𝐴 says the same saddha can lead to faith, same saddha can lead to another wisdom, same saddha can lead to effort, and also that same saddha can lead to unwholesomeness. Kusala can support kusala, kusala can support akusala, kusala can support abhyakata. Forget about the abhyakata, because in the javana level you can have a kusala, by doing a kusala, an outcome could be another kusala or it can be a different akusala. So we see the rational holism here. It's not governed by laws. For example, if you bring now chitta producing chittaja Rūpa is a law, because nature of the chitta would solely decide the nature of the chittaja Rūpas. It's impossible that given all the factors, the nature of the chittaja Rūpas can be predicted from the beginning. It's possible. But can we predict, I have done a wholesome deed, this wholesome deed, reflecting on this, would I get wholesome mind or unwholesome mind? If this can be predicted, then we are in a big problem. Then we are stuck in the deterministic world. So it seems like, according to Buddhist teachings, he is talking about rational holism. Buddha has taught about rational holism. Like, things are possible. With kusala, kusala is possible, akusala is possible. Even abhyagata is possible. By a specific act, specific belief, all things are possible. So likewise, in the mental arena, the probability, possibility and the probabilities come into play, which is not found in the physical world. So either in the mental arena, one can still argue and talk against me and say, based on Abhidhamma, and say, no, there cannot be two possibilities or probabilities, we can have one outcome. Then that person is talking about determinism. There's no argument in that. He may not be able to understand what determinism is, but if you say that there's only one outcome of a one cause, that's determinism, that's pure determinism. Only way is 2-3 possible outcomes. So that is being explained in Buddhist teachings. So as my opinion, rational holism is accepted, and it's something that can be known by ourselves as well. But then what happens, if this is the case, still we are going in, still we may bordering the randomness, because it could be wholesome, it could be unwholesome. So who comes into play? As you said, Yoniso Manasikara comes into play here. So Yoniso Manasikara, the deciding factor, whether to do this or that, evaluating the factors, the Yoniso Manasikara comes into play. If Yoniso Manasikara doesn't have the causal agency which I explained, is Yoniso Manasikara entirely governed by the prior causes? So it's already decided because of the causes that I may have Yoniso Manasikara or I may not have Yoniso Manasikara? Then it doesn't make sense, then it's still determinism. So Yoniso Manasikara, after Yoniso Manasikara, the outcome, the nature of Yoniso Manasikara, is it just a random thing? Is it just a luck or pure chance? We don't think so. Then we have no control over it. Then Buddha would not instruct us to do such things. So only thing is, we have the Manasikara that we may have I know this, when the Abhidhamma comes into play, there are many questions that will be difficult to answer, but I am talking about a very general logical argument. If Yoniso Manasikara, if the Yoniso Manasikara is the intermediate state to decide, I have done a kusala, the outcome would be another kusala or akusala, who determines this? Yoniso Manasikara, and who chooses on this path? And that has to be the Yoniso or Ayoniso Manasikara. Yoniso, which is not neither a it is a kusala according to Suttanta way. Ayoniso is akusala, but in Abhidhamma way, it's a Kiriya Chitta is involved there. So we have some kind of a safe zone there. There is a indetermined consciousness is deciding, do this or that. So it's a big role played by Manodwara Vajjana. So if it is one consciousness. So anyway, forget about that Abhidhamma theory. So there has to be a consciousness which makes the decision. And if this consciousness is making a decision, and that is the causal agency which I have been talking. So only then we can choose our own path. That means the future is open. I may choose this path, I may choose this path. But my decisions are highly influenced by the causal causes that I already associated and presently associating. But are they the sole decider of this decision? If the decision is 100% decided by the causes, then we are falling, then we have only one outcome, because one outcome, or otherwise we have randomness. So in order to avoid randomness or determinism, we have to have that controlling agent. So that controlling agent is, according to my opinion, that is the agent that the Buddha was touching in the Atthakari Sutta. I gave a discourse on this in Sinhalese actually previously. So Atthakari Sutta, this is the point he must be. So that's the point here. So I was talking basically on logic actually, rather than scientific finding, but I touched upon the scientific findings to make it more realistic or practical to the audience. But I could have easily spoken this based only on logic without touching any science as well.
Thank you very much. I don't want to make you more and more tired, because I know this is very tiring on the mind itself. So thank you very much, and much merits to you for expanding our knowledge and also highlighting these very deep and philosophical factors which normally we don't come across in ordinary desana or text. So thank you very much. Much merits to you. And let's hope, I wish you healthy, long life to continue this excellent service which you have been performing. Erwan Sarnai.
I think that's all right. So I think time is up. We have come into an important point now for next week. Next week we are going to conclude the Chitta Rupas, talking about the Rupas related to Chitta. So I hope you enjoyed the lecture, and may all this merit of discussing Dhamma be a helpful factor for all of us to attain Nibbana and for the sustaining, for the prolongation of the Buddha Sasana. Buddha Sasanam Chirantittatu, Buddha Sasanam Chirantittatu, Buddha Sasanam Chirantittatu, sadhu sadhu.